Call the meeting to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next on the agenda, item 1.03, approval of the agenda for this evening or revision. Is there a motion to approve the agenda for this evening? Rebecca, and a second from Sarah. Any discussion?
I know Jason was joining us late. He had a request for an additional executive session. I don't think we need two of them. It would just be an expansion of the motion. Or we can do two motions at one place. However, the agenda needs to be revised or not, as long as we're preserving the ability to do that.
So we have executive session on there, so at that time, he can make the motion to move into executive session for what he needed to have us do it for. So there was no suggestion we would have two. It's just under there, he'll make his motion.
Just want to make sure he doesn't get here at 7 o'clock and find out that it was
Oh,
too
no,
late
no,
to bring that
I
in,
got his
so.
message. I make sure we wouldn't do that to him. Any additional changes? All those in favor, please indicate aye. Aye, and no one's opposed or abstaining. All right, item 2.01, presentation, annual statistical report. Dr. Tice?
Good evening. As is customary, or had been customary prior to the pandemic, is we have a chance every year to go through the annual statistics. And as I have done in past years, we take a look at our performance over the past decade. And that's what the slide deck, in terms of the backup information that goes along with your desk reference that was distributed at the last meeting, helps you to do. First up is enrollment, and as you can see over the past decade, where a lot of other districts have lost enrollment considerably, we have trickled down but have stayed relatively consistent, just over 4,000 students in the district, at 4,100 for the 2021-22 school year. Attendance rate, again, very similarly, community that values education is sending the students at a roughly 95-96% attendance rate. In terms of FRIPL, or free and reduced price lunch count, as you can see, we've had a steady increase, and this actually goes back to the downturn in the economy in 2008. We have seen a gradual increase in the number of families that qualify and apply for free and reduced price lunches. Suspension rate has stayed relatively low, around 1%. I know there was a question about comparing the data. That is something, if it's the pleasure of the board, we can delve into our own in terms of subgroups, but again, it'll just be for us. It wouldn't be for neighboring districts. You could see from the state data, and again, everything in this book is verifiable off the public data website. We are about 1% suspension rate. Percent turnover in faculty has stayed relatively low. We've kind of crept down from where we were at the double digits to be in the single digits in terms of turnover, and that could be from anything as far as faculty getting other jobs, moving out of state with spouses, and so forth. Percent turnover in novice faculty, we've seen an increase since we last met with the 2018-19 data, where we were at 0, to seeing a little bit of a spike, probably related to the pandemic. I like President Mims's idea of reaching out to the FMTA to see if they have any additional information. And certainly our new Assistant Superintendent for Personnel is starting to do exit interviews with her arrival and/or surveys for those individuals that she's unable to connect with. Pupil-teacher ratio has been pretty steady at around 13%. You can see that the state, we actually had 1 decimal point worth in terms of significant figures, but over the course of the last few years since the pandemic, they've merely just rounded off. Regents Diploma and Regents Diploma with Advanced Designation, we're at the highest we've ever been in terms of Regents Diploma, and Regents Diploma with Advanced Designation, we are at about 75% for the past year. You can see the other numbers since the pandemic and where we were just prior to the pandemic. Dropout rate is pretty minuscule. Our faculty and staff do a great job in taking every student and working with them individually, and we try to minimize the number of dropouts. Total general fund expenditures, you can see that overall with a little dip because of the pandemic and not having to incur some of the expenses such as interscholastic sports or transportation during the remote years and hybrid years, we are about $20,070. I know there were some questions in terms of where these numbers come from. They come from the ST3 and they've changed it. If you go back to the 2018-19 booklet, you will know that the state was interested in separating it out by general fund for gen ed students and special ed. So districts could actually track any increases in special ed. You can see that since the pandemic, they've had a peculiar interest in the federal funding that's received, and we receive roughly $713 per student in terms of the feds, and the rest is on the backs of the taxpayers and state aid in terms of the local and state funding. Everything together adds up to the $20,070. I know there were some questions from the board ahead of time, given a recent article in Syracuse.com, which kind of identified each of the buildings in as far as the spending. And where those numbers come from, again, from the ST3, Mr. Corbin and I had a chance to discuss it. Within each district, it's how the budgets are put into those pots of money. So we're pretty consistent within our district. You can compare all 6 buildings kind of apples to apples. Where things get a little fuzzy is comparing it to other districts, not knowing what they put in the district money. So the district money could be all of transportation, as food service. In our case, we kind of lump everything, especially in the non-instructional areas, into the other district expenses. Where some districts, if you looked at some of the other schools, may have put that information into by building. So whatever metric they used to divide that up may have ended up in the building. So I would caution you in looking at the Syracuse.com article, knowing that district to district is more apples to oranges. Can you compare it? Yes, but you just have to, be careful in the sense that hopefully the state will define what line codes go in with the buildings and what goes into district expenses. The reason for that is because a few years ago, under our prior business manager, Mr. Furlong, who tore his hair out, is what they called fiscal transparency. And there were some schools and districts far to our southeast that were spending more in some buildings as opposed to others. So this all came about in terms of being able to compare what spending is occurring within a particular district in the different buildings. Was the rich getting richer, so to speak, and the poor getting poorer, or was the money equally distributed? So these are good numbers. I think as time goes on, it will improve, and the state will give guidance as to what goes in the buildings, what goes into the district money pot so to speak. But overall, as you can see from the graph on the board, we saw a slight downturn with the pandemic and not having to spend as much again for the remote or hybrid models, and it's starting to creep up again. Students with disabilities, you can see for years we were below 10%, and over the last couple years we've crept above that, and certainly we're paying close attention to that, to the students who qualify, and providing services as the IEPs are legally binding. And that ends the slideshow for now. Are there other questions regarding the statistics?
Yeah, I was just wondering if any of the findings were particularly surprising to you and why?
In terms of looking at the data, and I think I've shared this with the board before, and as you know, one of our goals is taking a look at learning loss. I know Dr. Coughlin isn't here to defend herself, and Dr. Doughton is out ill this evening. And there's different debates. Is it learning loss, deferred learning? Is it learning as it relates to academics versus social emotional learning in terms of students not being able to be together in class or on the playground and being able to socialize and so forth? As you could see from the data, that we did not experience what I think other districts experienced in ELA. In mathematics, we did see a little bit of a downturn, even compared to some of the other high-performing districts our size. So we did see something similar in math, and we certainly will pay attention to that going forward. But I think collectively, we are pleasantly surprised that ELA in our district remained very strong in spite of the pandemic. So I think the rhetoric is out there with the media in terms of learning loss. And I think, generally speaking, public education should be paying attention to it. But it was nice to see that in our own backyard, thanks to the teachers and the students and the families working hard, that ELA showed some strength there. Good question. So again, this book is for you to keep. It's a snapshot in time, and hopefully now that we're outside of the pandemic, future editions will be forthcoming in which we can compare. So at least I was a little lost for a couple of years without the data. And again, it's not the be-all and end-all. Again, it's vital signs, and certainly the health of a district will be determined by us as a governance team. But we would be remiss if we kind of didn't look at the pulse and respirations and blood pressure as we go forward. So having the vital signs back, I think, are important.
So it was my question about the suspension rates. You know, I don't know if even as a district, as we start to consider looking at more restorative justice practices, if we want to really dig into those numbers so that we can see progress in those areas, or, you know, where we have work to do, or the impact of any changes that we might make. And also, you know, my question was more like duration of suspensions. How long are students being out of school and missing important learning opportunities as a result of a suspension? To try to take a look at that. I don't know how other board members feel about that.
I would be happy to take a look at it. With a 1% suspension rate, we're not talking about a lot of paper shuffling. So I think we can take a look at it. As you could see, the VEDA reports, as I referenced, is, you know, something we take a look at in terms of the perpetrators. We don't necessarily take a look at and drill down on the victim, but we keep all the records of the data we have, at least those that go to a hearing. So we have that in the district office. As you can imagine, sorting things out in School Tool for some of the, you know, in-school suspensions or timeouts or things like that would be a little bit more difficult, but certainly those that go to a hearing, we can take a look at. That wouldn't be onerous on us.
Just want to make sure we all are in agreement, we have consensus on that. Just want to make sure I check in. Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Tice.
I mean, it wouldn't be like, having to take a look at the budget votes that a certain chair of facilities asked us to do. I mean, that was a lot of paper shuffling and,
Dr. Tice, don't some of our students who are suspended have school in some other form?
oh yeah, in terms of, yeah,
So, I mean. we
alternate
should
to
drill
homebound or
down.
homebound, but still, I
Right,
mean,
right.
they do miss
We
being
don't leave
here.
them.
And by education law, as you know, as an educator, I mean, that's the only thing we can leverage. One of the reasons I think the board knows that we bring a BOCES hearing officer in is it allows me to make sure the principal all of the principals are doing their job, but it also allows me to talk to the families as well, to let them know that unfortunately, only schools can only levy additional time away, that if they want to propose counseling or community service, then any kind of a plea bargain has to come from the family. So we try to educate. And again, as I tease Mr. Seidberg, I think we figured it was 84.8% that voted no or also no. So we can drill down into that data. That's a little sneak preview on next week's Thursday letter, but.
So, Dr. Tice, I think one of the things I keep coming back to this when we've gone through these reports before is, there's certainly valuable info in them, but these are all trailing indicators. And in this instance, trailing by like 2 years, right? So what I'm really interested in is your thoughts about what is available to us as leading indicators so that we can, where steps may be needed or additional support from the district may be needed, what the leading indicators are that we can look at so that we can be a little bit more proactive and in front of things than 2 years reactive. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I'd love to know really what your specific thoughts are on what the best leading indicators that we can be looking at on the topics.
In terms of
this report.
assessments and that, I mean, certainly with our common formative assessments, we'll take a look at those as far as response to intervention. Our teachers, whether it's in reading or math, are using Ames Web at the elementary level or STAR at the middle school level. So we use diagnostics. And you're right, this is 2 years in the rearview mirror, but it gives us the competitive data, the comparative data that we're able to take a look at. The data for the past year in terms of spring of '23, that's still trickling out. It's embargoed, then they release more, and it's embargoed, and they release more. So it's ironic that, I don't know if you caught in here, we had a typographical error. There was an errata sheet that was taped in, and the reason is the data never showed up. So I had actually used data from a year before, and I think I inadvertently put in during the hybrid years because the class sizes were about in half. And the administrators caught it, and part of it was, it was all my fault. The most recent release for this booklet, which is 2 years, just came out at Labor Day. So that was the last, the student and educator report, if you go to the public data site, was just released at Labor Day. So I ended up replacing the data from a year ago with the new data, and that's where the error was made, and that's why we did the cut and paste. But that just goes to show you, to your question, yeah, it seems like it's 2 years and it's old news, but part of this booklet just came out on this Labor Day. So the state is still crunching the numbers. So, I would like to say it's hot off the press just coming out from Labor Day, and the newer stuff is still embargoed until they sort through it all. So I think so. We can look forward, but I don't think this will be any more timely than the way it is right now with the state. But good question.
I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. So, Dr. Tice, in terms of looking at the data more like what they call it, street level, where through equity lens. So if we have groups of students that we're seeing who are not performing as well as other students, are we drilling down to look at are those students, do they have access to being able to stay after school? Do they have access to tutoring? Are we looking at, like, are we contacting families? Are we talking to the students to find out, like, what some barriers may be to those students being successful, so that we can maybe support them in a different way? Because the data tells us one thing, tell us, what students are doing, what students are performing, how they're doing it. But then there's the question of why, which could be a lot more complicated and may not be something we can't get unless we talk to the students and the families.
Yeah, I can have that discussion. I know our teachers work hard to get students in for extra help, and they'll make themselves available, but that's certainly worth drilling down. That's a good question.
Right, the teachers are available, but are the kids able to stay after school, right? Because we assume that all kids may be able to stay after school, but maybe some kids have to go home, maybe there's not a lack of transportation, maybe there's some other barrier preventing them from accessing the services that we have. Not that we don't have them, but the kids may not
Right.
be able to access them.
Yeah, we can find that out.
Thanks. Any additional questions? Oh, Rebecca, you had one, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in connection with conversations we've had about unfinished learning and learning disparities, that we acknowledge that state tests are one indicator. So now we have this data around maybe math being more of an issue from the pandemic than ELA. And is that a starting point for your team as you kind of do some of that internal work to look at some of the learning, the unfinished learning, as we call it, that resulted from the pandemic, and how we're working to address that? I mean, I know it's all being done already in the district, but I know that's something we've asked as a board to get our hands around, to understand better what proactive steps we're taking. So I was just curious kind of how you think about the state testing amidst everything else.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a starting point, and certainly other factors play into it. So, and especially in math, I think the longer that we have the students, we're able to make up any perceived deficiencies as well. But I think at the same time, the pandemic wreaked, a heavy toll on families and students. And so I think taking a closer look at it would be important.
So sort of along that same line, are we also, I know obviously it's good to look at objective data, but there's also talking to a lot of our very seasoned, tenured teachers and staff who see the same student, like the same class years over and over. And, are they being involved in this process at all so that they can say, gee, over the last 3 to 4 years, we're seeing a significant issue related to reading skills or whatever. And even though it may be a little more subjective, I think they usually have some really great feedback that might be able to inform what kinds of things we might want to explore doing differently, other than just looking at standardized test scores and that kind of thing. So I just wondered if that was discussed at the...
I think that would be valuable to have those conversations, certainly, especially at the building level. I know that's something Dr. Coughlin would do, but I know Dr. Dawn will probably continue it as well. And but at the same time, I think we should take pride in terms of our performance. I know there's some folks that think, the bottom has fallen out of Fayetteville-Manlius, and the scores are as strong as they've ever been, if not stronger in some areas. Good question.
I think this is some of what has been alluded to. I have some concerns, even as trailing indicators, about some of the statistics around student performance. There's no question that we have tremendously dedicated, wonderful faculty in this district who are doing the very, very best they can do and do a wonderful job with our students. But we've seen in the past some statistical differences, for example, between the two middle schools and performance between the middle schools. And there's outside factors that impact these statistics when we're just looking at things like state tests to figure out where things lie. And, one of those falls within, the sphere of just out of school tutoring, which largely comes down to economic ability to afford. And we have a lot of that still going on in this district. Some of it's true needs, some of it's perceived needs, some of it's, ascribe it to whatever you may. I'd love to see if we could figure out some ways, as we've been talking about doing more surveying of our families and more surveying of our students, if we could find a meaningful way to do that. And I think this is part of, Marissa, perhaps what your point was identifying where we have pockets of students who are not able to avail themselves of that. You talked, I remember years ago at several of the FM Education Foundation meetings about having a desire to be able to create an in-district tutoring model or tutoring system that would bring greater equity to the availability of those resources. I think it's something that we can and should be evaluating more deeply, but we can't do it without the data. And I don't think this data tells us what we need to know or not know about that, because we can't discern from this which students are availing themselves of that and which aren't. So
Sure.
I'd love for us to collectively find a better way to incorporate those types of inquiries into our family and student surveys that we're doing. So that, again, to the point of leading indicators and proactive indicators, to see where we can identify those needs and meet them with resources where they're needed.
Thank you for restating my point, Dan, I appreciate it. So there's a book, it's an excellent read, it's called Street Data, and it speaks to this very issue of how we can go in and collect that sort of data, which will help us identify why equitable issues in our district, why certain groups of students may not be able to perform as well as other students, and what we can do about that. So it goes beyond the test scores, and it really gets into how do we connect with families and students to find that information out. So it's a great book, Street Data. If anybody wants to get a copy of that, I highly recommend that particular book.
But it also goes to, and I know both of you didn't reference it in terms of, I know there's some folks that think we've put aside the scheduling committee and the start times rather than waiting for a construction project to come to a conclusion. I think we need to look at that too in terms of moving the activity period to the middle of the day. And that'll certainly help the high school. We got to look at it as a K-12 perspective for the other buildings, but people need to know that we're working towards that as well.
Any additional questions for Dr. Tice? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda, item 2.02, the electric bus town hall recap. Mr. Corbin.
I think we're on. So we did a presentation. I think some of you folks that were able to make it down to the bus garage, you got to see that. That was a lot more question-based than kind of statement-based, where the video itself probably has a little bit more kind of knowns, if you will. So I thought maybe I'd bring this tonight, and we kind of use that as kind of a talking point, and then kind of go forward. We can kind of wing it as it goes. If somebody has something, we can try and pause it and then kind of talk about that specifically. A lot of that same topics that we've kind of already shared, or for those of you who have made it down there, they're going to be included in this. So if you want, well, this is what would be potentially put on the website too, so you can take a look and kind of get your feedback. So that was, that's what we brought as far as like the actual presentation itself, was to do that, and then basically go through and then ask any kind of questions and talk about it. Overall, I think we had pretty good success at both events. The morning session, mostly from a district perspective, or I should say district's perspective, that was represented there. We had to have some good feedback where I think I'd indicated before that we had multiple districts reach out for actually the presentation we provided, and I think they've been sharing it. I was able to attend a function up at BOCE's function up in Rochester, and they spoke about it. We had a chance to talk to New York State ASBO group as well and had some more information. So I think it got, pretty well success from that aspect as well as well-traveled. Locally, I think we had some folks that I've had at least some questions from the past, and we've talked to. I had at least one reach out to Jeremy, and I've had a chance to give her a little bit of information as well, and it's basically been pretty quiet from that aspect. So I think everything, if I'm reading, the tea leaves per se, everything that's out there has been stated. The guidance that we've got, I don't see a lot changing between now and probably at least until after the budget vote. So some of it, we're gonna have to go forward again with some unknowns, but at this point, a lot of the information we've gotten, we've gathered, everything I've been being told, it's basically current, up to date, to the point where I think we're ahead of the vast majority of districts in the state in regards to the data that we've captured. So at that point, I don't know if you guys have questions or maybe anything, and I should have introduced John Cunningham as well, our Director of
Yeah.
Transportation.
I guess I would address it to John. The night of the town hall, several of your drivers expressed concerns. I'm worried, will we be able to keep them if we move to electric? Or they asked great questions. I thought they
Yeah,
were
you mean,
important
as
questions.
far as keeping the drivers?
Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely will stay there, but they just wanted to voice their concerns on being nervous about, like, I don't know many people that have electric vehicles, but some, I know they say they get that anxiety of the charge going down, so that's why they wanted to talk about it, because it's, that's probably the biggest fear, is how far they can go. Yep.
Can we just recap just one of, just what I heard multiple times said in a few different ways of that concern, since some people weren't there, and it was very unfortunate. I thought, Brad, you did a great job.
Thank you.
I thought it was very unfortunate how few people were in attendance in the evening. We've had some very strongly expressed opinions on this topic in this district, and we try to provide opportunities for dialogue. And people who have concerns on this topic, we want to hear from you. We want to have discussions with you, and it's difficult to do from the shadows, right? So it was disappointing in one respect, but Daryl, to your point, one of the things that I heard multiple times from several of our bus drivers was that the current policy, and whether it's written policy or best practice that they're following, I'm not quite clear, is that with our diesel buses, they do not allow them to go below half a tank of fuel.
Yes.
Which is really, it's a very important factor when we talk about electric busing, because the distance that a half-fueled bus can travel diesel versus a half-charged electric bus is a really dramatic difference. And we also heard very clearly that as the charge gets lower, especially in colder temperatures, the rate of droppage is significant.
Yep.
And that there are reasons for trying to stay above half. So when we talk about distance that an electric bus can travel on a full charge, that's not really the relevant conversation, because it's really what's the distance it can travel on half of a charge, because that's the practice we follow with the buses today. So that was the question that I heard raised multiple times that evening, that I think is a really important consideration, that things can happen when a bus is on a road, which is why we teach our young drivers not to let their cars go down below a quarter tank in their cars, and we try not to let the buses. And, another concern was our multiple trips that we take, the battery drainage they have on the morning runs, and then this perception of, well, they can come back between the morning runs and the afternoon runs and recharge in that interim. But I think one of the things that people do forget about especially in the winter months as we're heading into that, is what happens when we need to do an early dismissal? The buses have come back, the buses need to be charged, but you don't have time to. So now adding to the complexity of the decisions of should we be doing an early dismissal is, can we do an early dismissal? Do we have enough buses charged to put them out on the roads in what inherently is gonna be bad weather to begin with? So those were some of the things that I heard that evening. I just wanted to restate because unfortunately there were not as many people there. I think that the overarching thing that I think is very important for this district to be aware of is our first and most important concern, and John, your team does a wonderful job with this, with regard to busing, is making sure that we're putting our students on safe buses.
Yep.
And the safety of the students is paramount, which is why we do the replacement plans on the schedule that we do the replacement plans today. And, you know, we had the referendum in the spring, and I still believe that there was a misperception that people thought that if they voted down that referendum, that we would switch and in the same spring, the same session, go buy all electric buses. If that referendum was voted down, the alternative was going to be, we were going to run older, less safe buses on the roads.
Yep.
And I think it's very important for the residents in this district to understand that we are going to be moving to clean technology buses because that's the state mandate. But we're just trying to do this in a very thoughtful, deliberate, proper way so we don't have to do it twice. We're not building facilities twice, we're not changing chargers twice. And so Brad, I really appreciate the work that you've been doing on this, and I hope that more in our community can become more engaged in it so they can understand the level of thought and deliberative action that's underlying what we're doing with this as we move toward clean technology buses.
No, everything you said, you know, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you can see kind of the one slide, I've stopped it, and that's just kind of an example of one of the slides, and I think it's literally the same data we put up, you know, for folks at that meeting, both sides, to get a look at. That's not an anomaly. It's, you know, it's something that happens on a basis that's probably more consistent than not. And the one, and Dan, I'm glad you brought it up, was gonna be if, you know, we do have any event, whether it's weather or it's something, God forbid, it doesn't really, it's a situation where we need all buses at that point in time to get everybody out. There's the whole, you know, how our bus runs, you know, developed, and that's something that my previous district, you know, from time to time, people would talk about how empty the buses are, et cetera. Those runs are built for each kid. It's basically, if, you know, they needed a ride, that bus is gonna be able to take them. If we're gonna have one of those events, you never know when you may need that. I really don't wanna scramble to the point where we've gotta have somebody go define out of 65 or more buses, what percentage of, you know, electric charge we've got when it's all hands on deck. And we know it's just a matter of, in our cases where, you know, especially at the district level, we're getting questioned in probably a matter of seconds, maybe minutes at the most. What is your plan and how are you doing it? To let alone and have somebody go to try to find out 65 different buses and what they've got for capability. It, you know, it's something else that's gonna be part of a process. So that's one of it. The big thing, you know, why we strategically probably had, you know, the event down there at the bus garage was simply to take a look at it. It's, you know, roughly 10 years old. It's in really good shape. We got tons of compliments. But the big thing was, you know, what is the perimeter of it? You know, from private property to the road, to the school, to, you know, sports field. You know, I did have a chance to talk to the gentleman from Polera after and kind of talked about our, you know, basically situation where we're limited. At the same time, that's 32 routes that we've had to find. I kind of am thinking at this point, if 33 didn't qualify, they probably didn't qualify because they extended beyond what the capability of the electric would have been. So one solution would be to probably increase the number of buses, increase the number of routes, probably, to then therefore accomplish it. If we're gonna add any more buses, I don't know how many more before it's maximized down there, but I'm thinking it's probably, I can count on one hand.
Yep.
So therefore, we're gonna do something. And from a charger's perspective, I'm pretty confident that's not going to work. So that's gonna be a big decision for us. And as I had a chance in Rochester to talk to our ASBO director, who is gonna be speaking with the governor or representatives, you know, in FM's case, it's not necessarily just the bus. It's this, you know, residual ripple effect of how do we do it? If there's a hybrid model and we could do something to that extent, that'd be different. If there's another fuel source, it's hydrogen fuel cell, or something not requiring a charger, that could be a source. But in our case, what's limited to what it is, you know, we're gonna have a situation with how we're gonna move forward.
Brad, I just wanted to share, I participated in, there was a CNY School Board Association webinar on this topic, and it, you know, was very similar to what you presented in that it's a very complicated process, and I think sometimes the perception is that it's not as complicated as it is, because if people have their own electric vehicle at home, you know, it's, oh, I just plug it into my garage, and it's not that big of a deal. And so they were echoing a lot of the same issues that you have presented in the past. And they did talk about that there's reporting requirements for all the school districts to complete this year with regards to where they are in the e-bus process. And they were more so just advocating that, hoping that once the state received that actual data of how most school districts are really not even as far as we have gone in terms of trying to do an analysis and doing some of that study, that they're hoping that maybe the timetables get pushed a little bit more further out so that it can, a lot of these more complicated factors can get worked out a little bit better. So I just want to mention that it was, there's hope, I guess they're going to be gathering some more at the statewide level, some more data about all districts that maybe will shift some things, perhaps, or maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, I had a chance to get on the Rick Thames one. He always does a good job. It was an interesting format in the sense of, you know, we came with more of a PowerPoint and a presentation, and I think he took literally every question that was sent to him and then just responded. And if you were on it, you saw how many questions, and that thing could have kept going. It was like Santa's list, I think. It just kept rolling. And they were all great questions. There was no real oddball. You're kind of like, what was that person thinking when they created that question? They were just certainly certain things, whether it was a specific district and, you know, how, you know, what happens in certain districts maybe that are more conservative and they vote it down. What does that mean from a state aid? What does that mean if we don't comply with a penalty to whatever? That's going to be a question. From a funding perspective, yeah, I don't know. So I think everybody's in that boat where we're kind of gathering it, and as you saw it, oh my gosh, there was a whole bunch of questions and some answers, and then on top of it, timing. Like if we had to do a garage or anything else, those of us on the facilities committee, you see how long it takes to, you know, what we'll talk about later, probably with the pool and things of that nature. It takes a lot of time to get something off the ground and then literally get it going and up to that level. And with this thing, from that timing perspective, I don't know. It's going to be a very interesting process. So the only thing I've heard from the director is he said at this point there really wasn't a lot of movement to any kind of postponing, moving out, doing anything else, but he thought maybe this summer, I think there might be something coming up at least where there'll at least be a discussion and kind of maybe this data is what they're waiting for to help them kind of look at, does this really make sense at this point in time? But I'm only aware of a few districts that have kind of really moved to that level, and I think even then, they're still trying to look through their own data of kind of seeing, you know, does this really make sense and what's that cost going to be? So, but yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to reiterate what you were talking about, having to evacuate kids, having been in buildings in our district that have had to be evacuated for a variety of reasons, usually power outage kind of things, but it's important that those buses are there, they're ready, and those kids are safe. And I think that was very important when we came to the bus garage, that your drivers are so paramount in looking at kids' safety and being there when the kids need them. So kudos to all of your drivers because what they do is amazing.
Yeah, I'm glad that got brought up then. I was kind of curious how it was going to come out, you know, media-wise, or how it would be, you know, maybe reviewed or, you know, thought of maybe during that discussion. But the ultimate thing of kind of hopefully what everybody came through and understood was we're in a safety business. We don't really take chances. And as Dan was talking about earlier, we get to half a tank, and that's where we kind of, okay, we're going to go forward because we do that on, you know, to be conservative. At the same time, make sure that our assets, our kids, our people, et cetera, are gonna be in a place where we can be able to be mobile and take them wherever. So it would be a change in that overall philosophy, you know, from that aspect of it. I still have questions, you know, like I think you probably heard me ask that night, when you get down to that last 15 or 20%, what is that residual? Does it go to the drivetrain? Does it take away from heat or air conditioning? We've got kids with needs on there that require those certain things. So we're gonna need that information to be able to make it, you know, from a health and safety perspective, does this make the most sense?
Just had one other kind of way to think about this, and I know we've talked about it before, but I'm not sure if I saw it in the presentation, but I don't know if I absorbed the full presentation because it was chock full of information. But I mean, we're talking a lot about what our ability, our assessment of our readiness to meet the, you know, current mandate. But we also, you know, I know are thinking about as a consumers, you know, and our, you know, obligation to the taxpayers, consuming good quality products that are safe, that are cost efficient. I mean, this is such a new industry, the clean energy for buses, that it's changing by the month, and there'll be more and more manufacturers and the costs will go down. So giving ourselves that time to have a more robust market to shop from, I think is going to be so important. And, you know, I'm hoping by the time the mandate is in effect, because there could be an argument made, though, why don't we start buying buses this year? And I think you've already given me, you know, the board some examples of that some of the products out there are really not what we would want them to be, that are up to FM standards for safety.
So Rebecca, you know, that's some of the things that I figured it would come up, and it was gonna be a valid question, or a valid question, I should say, is in parentheses there, without funding. So a couple of residual questions I think have come probably to the board's attention as well as mine. What is those, you know, you see kind of the NYSERDA grants and things of that nature, what does that mean for FM? And I don't think it's changed a ton in the sense of, you know, whether we believe it or not, and how we're deemed from a wealthy district or not, and a needs-based district. And a lot of those, there are some certain opportunities that are afforded, but based on what I'm seeing from what, you know, our folks at New York Bus Sales that have helped us go through it, I think at that loose figure kind of thing is we determined was somewhere on that 40%. So you can take 40% of all those numbers, and that's kind of where you're gonna get to from that aspect of it. That's just the buses. It's not the chargers, it's not everything else. And there's the lead and the lag time for how long to get that, you know, those products, et cetera. And again, if it's a facility upgrade, et cetera. I don't know, you know, as far as like the bus manufacturers, everything you're kind of told, you know, it's like kind of going to an auto dealership and how long is it going to take to have that thing, and you get told something, is it 100%? I'm not sure. But at this point, I know, you know, there's 45 or give or take 45,000 buses that are all coming out in some kind of period of time. So that's a whole bunch of buses at one time. And it'll be interesting to see if they're all going to roll out when they do, from that aspect. So I think they're kind of probably waiting a little bit too, because what are they doing? You know, at this point, it's been stated it, but I don't know. I haven't heard them slow down on diesel manufacturing itself, but I'm not sure if you've heard anything, John, and you're.
No, I really haven't heard of them slowing down with the diesel part of it. The biggest thing is there's so many unanswered questions, and one of the biggest ones is the range, and that's what everybody talks about because of the half-tank thing. Every year that you can put off buying them, one of the guys in the shop had a good analogy of it. It's like when the first cell phone came out. I remember my dad, he had the suitcase cell phone, you know, and all it was to do was to call people, didn't do anything. Now you got a little computer, you know, you can do everything, you know what I mean? So it just needs time a little bit. So every year that you can not get it, I realize you have to wait for the public to vote it in or whatever, but every year you can put off getting it, that technology is going to get that much better. So when you get one, it's going to be good instead of getting one that doesn't do everything you want it to do, and then it sits in the back corner. It's like, it was probably 15 years ago, the big thing was compressed natural gas. They were pushing for all the school districts to go compressed natural gas, and you had to go down to Central to have your buses filled and everything. And I think it was North Syracuse actually bought 4. And in the first year, they were broke more than they used them, and they sat in the back corner of the parking lot, and then they honestly had to have them repowered with diesel engines in them because the technology was not there. So they bought them, but then they were broke all the time, so then they had to convert them over to a diesel bus. So the longer you can put off getting one to see what's gonna happen, I think is the better way to go.
Thank you very much. So in terms of circling back and making sure the community is informed, because there was low attendance, and this is going on the website, and there's, NISBA's gonna do some advocacy, and ASBO's gonna do some advocacy at the state level. But to inform our local community, I think like we should really have a plan to go out before the budget vote to explain to people what the misconceptions are, what the safety issues are, not just on the website, but through social media, maybe the Eagle, maybe the Post Standard, maybe working in collaboration with our BOCES districts to put that information out as much as possible before we go to vote again. So I hope that's something we could put together so that we make sure that people are informed and not voting based on these misconceptions about the electric buses.
No, I think you're right, Marissa. It's one of those where I think the video was kind of the first step, was to kind of put something out, get it on the website, start talking, whether or not maybe we do another town hall. I'm open to whatever. I think, I got some of the people I recognized at least names, so I was happy I got that, but I didn't see the volume anywhere near what I would hope. But at the same time, I don't know, being conservative by nature, if it's just like the days of budget hearings where you thought you had somewhat of a topic that would generate a lot of interest, and you get to the hearing and you got 3 people there, and it's like, boy, I really would have thought I had a whole bunch of people that, really would have liked to discuss their opinion. So I do think it's gonna be, from the Rick Thames doing his thing, there was quite a varied group that was on there. We hit the topic at my local BOCES, the topic again hit ASBO. I think it is gaining traction in the sense of it's getting discussed because that timeline is coming up quicker and quicker. So I'm open to whatever, but we do need to, ideally, I'd love to know where we're gonna go before we put together the budget, especially for this year, to talk about kind of, what are we doing? Because when that proposition comes out and it reads either electric or diesel, or it reads hybrid of both, we really want to be pretty comfortable, at least have done our homework as best we can to determine, is this really what the steward of the district we'd like to do, on behalf of that. So I'm going to be open to that. I know Facilities Committee, I plan on, we're still talking about it from that aspect, and I was kind of hoping that that activity that we've kind of posted there, at least people would be open to that feedback of, sure, give us your information. Jeremy's offered from New York Bus Sales to come in and present. So we have a lot of opportunity. We have a lot of good people with data, things of that nature, but at this point, I don't think we have a solution or we have a firm answer one way or the other.
Brad, could I offer some loving feedback? I know a lot of these statistics, but it went fast for me. If you could slow it down, I know whether you did it or John did it. I just think people can't absorb it that fast.
I think we're on like the 5th version, and and I was curious because you were going to be my sample test where we kind of got through it, but I know because I've seen it so much that I can just pick out in my thing. So I'm glad you did give me that feedback, because we actually slowed it down probably by almost in half of what we had it. So that's how quick we were rolling. So I'm kind of wondering if we can almost cherry pick slides. When we got to like the chargers and all the different, it's just a lot of data. So, and then we got into, okay, how do we split it up? And we were trying to keep it on the same page. So yes, the short answer is we can certainly slow it down, and I'm fine with that. And I'm glad you gave me that feedback. Yep. Well, that was the thing. We could have different entertainers we could have put off. We had all kinds of different opportunities, but I didn't want to, segregate anybody against anybody else from their music taste.
I mean, I think ultimately you'll want to have as it gets closer to the budget vote, this is all kind of the information, the why, but I think it's essentially we want to come out with our position statement and so if it's a slide, if it's an article, but really the messaging of what we've analyzed and why we're deciding to hold this year, or, I think we have to probably look at it year by year. So maybe that's more for Dr. Tice, but I think that's missing here, but it's not missing because I know this is just a preliminary fact gathering and presenting that information.
Yeah, I think if anything, we'll look at what we've got for exemptions, and it's probably going to be similar to that format where we'll get some data and then kind of talk about some couple points, and then we'll kind of go forward from that aspect. you know, I think the big thing, and you already know this, Rebecca, is where we're really kind of, was hoping for a little bit of time on, at least on the state level, where at least if the longer we maybe pushed it out, maybe the more data we'd be able to get to be able to make some kind of a decision that makes the most sense. But once, I'm not gonna lie, I got frustrated once I heard basically at this point that, you know, the governor's really not looking at doing anything different than simply, here's what it is. And they've identified some grants, but that's great. If you don't really qualify to that level, then what are we doing? And then there was still, as Sarah indicated earlier, that Rick Tim's presentation of, I don't know how long, half an hour worth of questions. And that's just one after the other. He wasn't slowing down. And to that level, that's just that. And I'm like, oh my goodness, think of all the districts that didn't come in and all the other unique ones. So there is a whole bunch. But ultimately, yes, we're going to have to come through one way or the other because we have to put a proposition up and we need to know ahead of time. We want to be transparent about it.
The arguments against it well in advance, not 2 days before with the
Yep.
signs popping up.
Agreed.
So, yeah, no, I'm just thinking to the future, not for now. I think you did a great job with gathering this information.
Okay, thanks. Yep, are there any other questions?
Thank you very much. Thank you, John.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
No, Mr. Corbin gets to stay up. Where are you going? Oh, okay. So next we have a presentation on tax exemptions from Mr. Corbin. That's the veterans, senior citizens, and first responder tax exemptions.
We'll do a little bit of background, then it'll be the veterans exemption portion, volunteer fire and rescue exemption, senior citizens exemption, talk a little bit about a summary, and then I'm sure there'll be some questions. So that's kind of how we were going to frame it tonight. So some of the background, the state's expanded exemptions allowable under law, and also made a provision that these exemptions would apply to school property tax bills if local boards of education choose to adopt these exemptions, and they can be adopted individually or all of them. The resulting law is very complex, and the Board of Education can, if it decides, to allow the exemption and at different exemption values, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the exemptions. So from a veterans exemption standpoint, you can see in the bullets, the top part is kind of talking a little bit more about kind of identifying it. So veterans exemptions can vary. Examples include wartime, combat, disabled, so there are different variations. Estimates, what I've gathered, I was able to get from Onondaga County. So, and again, they are estimates because they're projections and it's not a defined thing. But Onondaga County at this point estimates that FM has approximately 1,120 veterans exemptions. Previously, I think when the last time we looked at this was 2022 or a year ago, give or take, it's up from about 994. The assessed dollar value of veterans exemptions is approximately $47,182,000. And that's up from about $42,487 in 2022, so about $5 million, and again, that's assessed values. So from an analysis perspective, the estimated tax rate impact provided by the county, and again, there's different levels or different variables of how you want to offer from an exemptions perspective. For instance, wartime, as I've got in parentheses, at $36,000, combat veterans, $60,000, and from a disabled veteran at $120,000. So, and the values that we've received from the county, the estimated tax rate impact would be approximately $30.92, and that would be on that normal kind of $100,000 home assessment. When I say normal, that's the example we usually use during the budget season. From a total shift in dollars, we're talking about roughly about $1 million that would shift over, and again, it'd be from folks that were going to receive the exemption to folks that wouldn't be able to qualify from a veterans exemption. So that represents some of the data there in regards to the veteran exemption. And then I've got other exemptions that I was going to go through, and then we can certainly go back and talk to these individually. Volunteer fire and rescue exemption. So again, data up on the top. Volunteer fire and rescue exemption requirements, volunteer firefighter, ambulance worker, and minimum service requirements 2 to 5 years and or a lifetime exemption with 20 years of service. Onondaga County estimates that FM has approximately 47 fire and rescue exemptions that would be potentially out there. And the estimated assessed dollar value of fire and rescue exemptions is approximately $1.2 million. And again, it's assessed value. For the analysis perspective, a tax rate impact, it's relatively minimal. In this case, it's about 80 cents on a $100,000 home assessment. Shift in dollars of the tax base would be approximately 27,000. And then the main point there is the fact of it's just a smaller number of people, in this case about 47. And overall, again, that 27,000 overall in the shift of dollars, or 80 cents on a $100,000 home assessment. Senior citizens exemption, some of the requirements, 65 years old, there's income limitations. I think the income limitations that I've received is 55.7 thousand, and then up to 58,400. There's some other data that Sarah and I were talking about earlier in regards to what defines the income, and I've got that, whether it's Social Security and things of that nature, and we can certainly go through that data. Onondaga County estimates that FM has approximately 716 senior citizen exemptions. The assessed dollar value of the senior citizens exemptions is approximately $60 million. And from an analysis perspective, the tax rate impact would be $39.94 on a $100,000 home, and total shift in dollars would be about $1.3 million. So from a summary perspective from the veterans, again, the tax rate impact would be $30.92. Shift in dollars overall in the tax base would be around $1 million. Volunteer fire and rescue, approximately 80 cents on a $100,000 home, and 27,000 will be shift in the tax base. And the senior citizens, it's $39.94 and 1.3 million overall. So from a summary perspective, the amounts and values are, again, our projections and estimates. We can't say with any certainty that this will be a true reflection of the exemption data or the exemption groups. The impact of shifting all three exemptions and this analysis using that data is approximately 2.4 million. The tax burden from those receiving exemption would merely shift the exemption amounts to the remaining taxpayers in the district. Some of the questions: how do you determine one exemption is worthy and any of the other exemptions are not? And how would the community react to a $2.4 million tax shift? Again, as I spoke back, I think in February, having, in my case, my dad, who served in Vietnam, who was a fire chief and as a volunteer firefighter for the majority of his life, and now he's 75 years old, he would qualify in some way, shape, or form for all three different exemptions. So I asked him that same question in February, and I asked him again this morning on the way here. He's very proud of his service. He's very proud of volunteering as a fire department, and he's a proud senior citizen. And it was kind of, how do you handle it? And he just said good luck to me and said, let me know how you make out. So, but in fairness, he kind of said, again, he said, it's something that he thinks it's the right thing to be recognized, but at the same time, he has a hard problem with that burden. How do you go and shift that onto maybe some folks who maybe can't, aren't the same level he's able to? But by no means is he rich, but it's a situation where, he did these things and, he is through and through a member of all three of those groups. So it's one of those situations. I don't have, a great answer for anybody here, and I don't think probably you do either. I think all three are worthy, and, I'd love to be able to do it in a utopian world. I'd love for New York State to pick up the burden and actually do it themselves rather than put a school district in there, and it's one of those where we're pitting districts against, taxpayers from that aspect where we're trying to shift potential taxes over from one group to another. I think one of the questions I had is ultimately there could be in our scenario if, we were able to push all three of the exemptions through, you could have certain ones who maybe qualified for one, didn't qualify for the other two, and maybe they were impacted negatively based on whatever that impact was. So that would be a scenario I'm guessing they probably hadn't thought of, and I don't think they'd like that unfavorable outcome. So not an easy answer, but that's the data we've got, and that's the best I think I've seen at this point, at least for up to date and kind of those projections. I don't think the projections are probably going to change a ton unless maybe some of the income-based levels or things of that nature are there. The senior citizens one's probably the biggest wild card in the sense of, people's income can change at different times, especially if there's as much data in there that can impact it from a variable perspective. So that could change maybe some, but I think that's probably still a pretty realistic, detailed, analysis of that data. So that being said, I'm sure there's going to be questions and some comments, so I'll let everybody go through.
Before we get into questions, we did receive, I just got this today, response from Senator Mannion's office. in regards to our correspondence asking about the state funding these veteran tax exemptions. And I'll pass the letter around, but he simply states that there is no state mechanism for school districts to seek state funding for these exemptions, and there's no state funding for any of them, for all three of them. So it doesn't offer any, like advocacy, like, okay, maybe we should try to do this. He just simply says it doesn't exist. And that, also that 95% of county, city, town, and village tax jurisdictions are providing the veterans with the real property tax exemption. So, not much of a, anything to follow up on there. So just wanted to let people know we did hear back from Senator Mannion. A limited response, I guess.
Brad, just a question on the numbers, and I think it was for the veterans exemption. If you could go back to the slide, just something caught my eye in there. You mentioned in your words when you were speaking to it about the different levels. So for our example and for the calculations you've done, it's level K that's being shown. Is that the highest level in terms of the biggest exemption we can offer? Is it in the middle? Is it low? Where does that fall?
Jason, it's roughly, I would say, in the middle. Level N seems to be one that's, at least from a district's perspective, my own home district, West Jenny, uses that, and that's level N. I think the county uses level K, so the data they gave was in their own data books. But the answer to your question is I believe it's more in the middle than it is at the maximum. There is a maximum that would be higher. So basically from that scenario would be more of an impact.
Great, thank you.
So, just in terms of process, we're gonna have a public hearing on this. I don't remember what date that is.
We'd have to post for 30 days, so I know it'll probably have to be the December 11th at this point. November 27th would be too fast to a turnaround.
So the hearing would start now?
The hearing would be on the 11th. We'd have to post for 30 days. Legal could not be with us tonight, but they could be with us on November 27th.
So just for the public's benefit and then for ours as well, a hearing is for what purpose on this issue specifically?
To allow the public an opportunity to speak on both sides of the issue, those in favor of it and those who against, before the board makes its official vote.
So Craig, on the process then, how's that different from public comment, right? So if we're having a public hearing, I guess are they allowed to speak longer? Or could the same thing be accomplished through public comment? That if we had the public hearing on December 11th, I guess we're not voting on it till at least January then, right?
You would have to have the hearing first, and then you could vote after it on the 11th, or board's discretion, you could wait till January.
Is there any additional information that people are thinking they're gonna need? Or right now, is it just giving the public an opportunity to come and share their opinions with us? Because if there's additional information or questions the board has, we should make sure we get those into Dr. Tice and to Brad beforehand so that we have all the information. I don't know if I wouldn't recommend making a decision immediately after the hearing. I think we might need some time to digest what we've heard from the public. But that's up to the board if you wanted to vote that evening.
I think the only thing statistically that jumped at me, and I'm not questioning you received the data you got, but the number that jumped out to me was 716 eligible senior citizen exemptions in the entirety of our district. Now, I understand there's an income component to that, but is there a way to verify that number? That seemed strikingly low. And I want to make sure we're basing decisions on accurate info.
So what I did from the calc perspective, and I'll answer your question, I think I probably calced it maybe 3 or 4 different times, and then I had Don Weber at the county review my data. So basically, he did basically a download of everybody that ideally that would qualify based on those income restrictions and met the age limit. So I know it's been looked at least 4 different times with my questions. I can certainly ask him again on that download if he thinks anything could change, because probably one of the questions Marissa was alluding to, is that data going to be potentially different maybe by the time the hearing arose, or if there's any questions to make sure that kind of we've got the most appropriate or most accurate or reflective data to be able to make a decision to be able to go forward. I'm guessing that income threshold is probably what threw it, but I can certainly ask that question.
I mean, I don't think we should be voting the night of the hearing. Hard no.
Any additional questions?
I just think the most important thing that we've learned through this, and I think that, again, this is all about how we communicate out to the community, is that these are not funded exemptions. And so what that means is if resident A is granted is eligible for one of these exemptions that we were to grant, it means that whatever school tax savings that person is receiving is being passed to their next door neighbor. And that's the difference between funded exemptions and unfunded exemptions. It's just redistributing that across the rest of our in-district tax base. And, I think that there's to me, it's very interesting that there's income limitations on the senior citizen exemption, but there is no income limitation, for example, on the first responder exemption, and there's no income limitation on the veterans exemption. And I just find that to be an interesting thing that I think people should be mindful of as we go through the process. But I really genuinely look forward to hearing from the community at the public hearing on this.
Well, I hadn't really thought about it a lot, Dan, the one aspect until you brought it up, but, thinking about it from, the fire and rescue, for instance, and the dollar impact, and then if the other two were selected, it would totally go, you could be getting what you thought would be something where you've kind of going up and kind of getting justified of like, here, we do deserve this, and here's the reason why, and things of that nature, and that's ultimately what you want to give. But if you turned around and gave it back in the sense of even more of a burden, oh boy. So, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, it's a no-win from that aspect, so.
Thank you. All right, next up, item 2.04, President's Report. So we had received several emails and then some questions from board members in regards to pool construction. So those questions were forwarded to the architect, to Mr. Corbin, to Dr. Tice for a response. There's a shared document that has those responses in there. And these responses will be then sent out, or going to be sent out to people who've asked us these questions. I think they also should be shared probably on the Facebook page, because there's a momentum in the community, a lot of questions, and I think this could clear up some of those questions for the community. So I think getting it out to the public in general will be helpful. But I wanted to know now, based on this information, if there are any clarifying questions that board members have, and then if we could have a discussion about next steps, because now we have this information, where we plan on doing this information, where do we want to go with it. So if we could start with first, are there any questions in regards to the responses that we did receive?
Marissa, so the preliminary study that was done in 2016, I'm not really sure who wrote that they weren't part of the discussions, but so who completed that study, and how extensive was it? was sort of unclear how detailed of a study it was, because it was called preliminary, and I wasn't sure what those figures came from.
I was gonna ask Daniel, he's been chair of facilities for a while now, he probably can answer those questions, or one of the two of you.
I'll take a stab at it, then he can bail me out. Originally, if you recall, we hired consultants back when we were deciding whether or not to replace Wellwood or renovate and refurbish Wellwood. There was a huge community task force with stakeholders and representatives. And at that time, one of the considerations was to make the current high school the middle schools, so to speak, that Eagle Hill would become the new Enders, and that a new high school would be constructed. So the preliminary calculations were done as a teaching station for a new high school, wherever it would be located, on Pride Lane or whatever. So the idea was, could we incorporate an aquatic center as part of a teaching station, and how much aid would that generate?
I was not on the facilities committee in 2016. I was on the community committee on the whole Wellwood project. And we did talk about this very briefly at facilities as well at our last meeting on just the 2016 piece. My understanding was this was not a feasibility study. It was not a scoping out of wants, needs. It was back of the envelope, what might it cost, without design plans or any detailed feasibility study or needs, wants, size. It was back of the envelope. I'm not aware of anything any deeper than that being done. It was done, as Dr. Tice said, in the context of if a new high school were to have been built at that point, what type of aid could possibly be available to it from the state, and what might just very, very, very rough costs consist of. And I'm not aware of it consisting of anything more than that. I've never actually seen it in writing, other than I think I was shown at one point in time a single row on an Excel spreadsheet with a dollar number.
It was basically, given, we call them students, the state calls them building aid units, that how many teaching stations would it account for in that new high school, and what would be the aid that would be generated. So there were no developmental plans, as far as what it would look like.
So I guess, that being said, I would very much caution publishing this or sending that number out, because it really is not a real number then. Well, the FM pool study 2016 and the estimated project cost for it.
Oh, that's separate, so that was what, in current dollars, he estimated it to be
But it's not,
$20 million. But I think that was, I don't believe that was based on the previous study. We can clarify that. I thought that was a current number that she was giving.
That's
That was
what-
current numbers, taking a look at the North Syracuse pool and extrapolating out.
Yeah, they
well,
said,
that's not what it says here. So,
oh, I see, because what I did was copy and paste this, so I can see why it does look like it was based on that study. That was more of like a clarifying point that she made at the beginning, and then she made these bullets in there. So because I got like multiple emails, so I cut and pasted in there, so I apologize if it looks like that's all related to the study. Those all things were separate from there.
So I guess I just want us to make sure, if we're gonna communicate, to the public, that we're making sure that it's real facts, because if we have not actually done a real dive into what the needs are and what the costs would be, I wouldn't want it to be perceived either, oh, it's really inexpensive or really expensive, because we just don't know at this point, right? So I would just be, it's fine to show these other district, like comparable amounts, maybe, I don't, just for reference, but it's misleading to say that we actually did a pool study, so I would not want to publish that information.
Sure, and we would edit this and send it out to the board to get approval of anything, to make sure it's all been vetted by the architects and Mr. Corbin and Dr. Tyson, the facilities committee before it would go out. So yeah, I mean, estimating it at $20 million, my question would be, and I think the taxpayers would want to know, okay, if that is the cost, then what does that look like in terms of potential, like, tax increase for community members? And then there was something in here about, a minimal number, what was it, 1 million maybe, $1 million maybe all that is aidable. So I think fleshing all of that out, I think is important.
But
so
I
that we
think we're
have the-
kind of, sorry to cut you off, Marissa, but I think we're kind of getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, and I think we have to start with, what are we looking to design, and what would it incorporate? And where would it be located? Like, just sort of go through a preliminary design spec and analysis of what do we think we need for our students? And if we want to make it a more community-wide, bring in feedback from other community members who have interests one way or the other. So we know, okay, now we can go and start talking about actual details of, this is what it might cost and might be the impact to taxpayers, or, I mean, I'm not sure we're at that point yet. I mean, we're just starting to, unless this has been on our long-range plan that we've already done a lot of analysis, but it sounds like it hasn't been, so we don't really have the data to make a informed communication on the details at this point, right? We
So
more
this-
need to talk through the process.
This document was based on the board requesting that we get back to people who've written to us and asked very specific questions. And then there were questions from board members that were also asked. So I took those questions and I put them out to our business office, and they went to also to the architects. And there's some notes in here about them perhaps needing to go to council or fiscal advisors, et cetera. So those things are in there. But the board was asking that we get back to people with responses to their questions. Now, I did say we need to talk about next steps. I don't know what those next steps are, other than this is what the board asked me to get as far as responses. We do need to get back to the public and let them know what those responses are to their questions, because there was also urgency from the board, which is completely reasonable, that we get back to people with these responses. So I don't want to delay response to people. I understand why people want to be careful in the preliminary numbers and things that we put out to people, but also want to be transparent. So what I need from the board is, what do we want, how do we want to respond to the people who've written to us and ask their very specific questions? Whatever that information is that we put out there, I'd like the board to get to consensus on that as soon as possible, so that information can go out to the community, however that looks. Perhaps this is just background information for the board, but there were specific questions that people answered that I feel we need to get back to them as soon as possible. So however we do that, we need to do it as soon as possible, I believe. So, I mean, this is something, perhaps facilities, I don't know when the next facilities committee meeting is there one soon? 16?
Can I just step in first?
Maybe that's
Can
something
I just
facilities could look at.
step in for a second on this? So we did start this discussion at the last two facilities meetings, one I was not at and the last one that I was at. And it is planned as a continuing discussion at our next facilities committee and meeting, and likely the one after that. I agree with what Sarah said. I think, first of all, I think any reference to what happened in 2016 as a study, I think that's a misnomer. I'm not aware of a study. I'm aware of back of envelope numbers. But I think that there's a slightly different approach. We've gotten a lot of emails, gotten calls about this, but I think that the proper response is not to delve into details that aren't based on formulated plans and evaluation, but a response that we hear this, we're trying to pull together the answers. It's being dealt with in facilities committee. It's being looked at very closely by that committee, by the architects, in the context of our upcoming BCS that we'll have in early 2024 that also helps drive build district needs, also in the context of the security and safety reports that we took possession of earlier this year that are also going to drive project needs, and that the facilities committee is going to be digging deeper into this. And that what I would encourage for the board is that when the facilities committee has a recommendation in terms of a course of action for the board, that we'll bring that back to the board for consideration of that course of action. But I think anything before that right now is a little bit cart before the horse, because there's a lot to be discussed. And, you know, when we started our last facilities committee meeting, it started with numbers of, well, X district is doing this and why, but numbers I don't think are relevant, because we haven't even begun the discussion here of needs and wants. And we've had a little bit of discussion about potential locations, but we're nowhere near the point of numbers. So I know we get to committee reports later, we're probably gonna go past, but to be very clear, we had a 2-track discussion on this at the facilities committee meeting. One was, what can we do today to ensure adequate facilities for these programs to continue, so they have adequate facilities? And the direction by the facilities committee at our last meeting to our athletic director was not to just sit on the plane with the city school district on signing a contract for this year, but to put forth a contract proposal for the next multiple years to ensure that we have contracted space locally for a period of years. Because even if we were to decide tomorrow, we're going to build an aquatics facility, as Jason said at the meeting, it's not going to be built tomorrow. It's not going to be done and occupied in a week from now. It's going to take years to do, if we were even to do that. So the 2 tracks were, what do we do today to ensure that they have places where they can practice and compete? And then be deliberate, but committed to being deliberate in evaluating whether there's a feasibility of this in the context of the overall district needs. So the response, from my viewpoint, is a very simple one. We hear you, we understand it, we are working on it, and as we develop this, we'll look to have some broader communications with the community, and then determine a plan of action on the long-range piece of this.
Okay, that sounds very reasonable, but I just want to make sure we have consensus on getting back to people who've asked these questions. And if you would, I would appreciate if you would help to draft that response based on your knowledge of facilities, et cetera. But, you know, when people ask us very specific questions, they're looking for us to respond to those. So, but I would appreciate if you could draft something up from your perspective as facilities, and that, because we do need, it's coming from the entire board, so we need consensus on the board from the board to agree to it, and then we can get that out. I just want to make sure we get back to people as soon as possible, and then we're all in agreement as to how we're going to respond to these specific questions that we got from folks. Wait a minute, Sunday, it's only Monday, come on now, you can get this done for us. Nope, well, that's, or if anyone else from facilities could just get something started, because some of these questions came in at least 2 or 3 weeks from now. I get it, I understand. But I just want to get something drafted. I mean, if we can start something, we can all see the document and come to agreement on it. I just would like to get back to these people, because, you know, we told them at the last meeting that, you know, we're going to respond to your questions, we're going to get back to you. So if we're changing course, I just want to let those folks know and let them know what the next steps are.
I think it's reasonable to let them know now that we've discussed it in facilities committee, we're going to continue discussing it, and we'll have a more detailed response to that as soon as we can.
Yeah, and I guess I would echo that. I think what we owe the community is just transparency into the process. I think it's frustrating when they don't, you know, when members of the community have something that's on their mind and they try to get information and they just don't know how the process works. And if we can articulate that this is the steps we're going to be taking, and we're going to be reporting back at the next board meeting or every every other board meeting or whatever. I think that goes a long way into building the trust that we're actually doing what we said we're going to be doing, and people can continue to learn about what progress is being made and have a voice as part of that process. But if we, just aren't able to articulate that, that's when people get frustrated, so.
That seems like a pretty simple communication, and I would just add that for those that are asking specific questions, we should assure them that we are, pulling those questions together, and to the best of our ability, we'll address all of them. And I think it would be best anyways to get the information out, in a Q&A format, whether it's the board or a memo to the community that would really try to answer every question that our community has, particularly those that are really focused on this issue.
So for now, we're going to send an simple email. We have received your questions and we are working on this. We'll give you more detailed responses in the future. Where everybody's in agreement on that? Okay. Discussed in the meantime. Okay, I just want to make sure we're all in agreement because we do have some responses here and I just want to make sure everybody's in agreement. You want to respond? Okay.
I don't think we have to collaborate after Sunday or whatever. I'll just get that sent out.
That's fine, Craig, and the only thing I'd ask, right, just generically is if and when we get any updates from Scott Sugar or from you about what our signed contract status is for years going forward, if you could just keep us informed.
May not have it for this response, but yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Also in the President's report, Rebecca attended a meeting with the Interfaith Religious Council as a parent and as a board member there, and she's brought some information back to share with the board. Rebecca?
I've kept the board in the loop, and Dr. Tice in the loop throughout the last few weeks, but in response to the October 7th massacre of Israelis and the subsequent invasion by Israel into Gaza against Hamas, there's been an international uptick in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia that, we're seeing across the world. And there was a focus by some community members to bring together Interfaith Works, WCNY, faith leaders, education leaders to look at how is this impacting our schools, K-12, and what can we do to build bridges of understanding and reduce the spread of hate and, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia specifically, but really more broadly, how can we use the platforms that Interfaith Works has for dialogue to really help our students and help our educators to deal with this issue that continues to be a very big issue for a lot of people in our community. So I was invited as an Interfaith Works board member and a parent. There were OCM BOCES administrators there, Doreen Bergman and Colleen Vigiano. There were some JD leadership was there. This was a pre-meeting really with an eye towards bringing in many more school districts. And so the meeting on the 17th will be that, and Dr. Tice is able to attend as well, which is great. So it's really a start of a conversation and a constructive dialogue in the community, how we support our schools, and the first really order of business is seeing what the schools are seeing and hearing and what they need for additional support, and how our faith and education leaders can help with that effort. So it was a great safe space for many people to share their thoughts on the issue and the topic. And I think I think at this point, Dr. Tice can keep you in the loop, but I will participate just in my capacity as a community member. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, next on the agenda, item 2.05, the superintendent's report.
Certainly, I have two reports to give here, followed by mental health, and then I want to make a statement after that. So let's start with the superintendent's report. It's in your backup information. Item 1, capital project update. The FM High School Capital Improvement Project continues with the installation of the structural steel for the new technology addition that's on the front facade of the high school. Everybody seems to be asking about it. They'll be pouring the floor and the masons will be back, and so we're hopefully going to get it enclosed as winter weather sets in. Item 2, spelling bee. I'm pleased to report that the Fayetteville-Manlius Central School District hosted our spelling bee right here at Eagle Hill Middle School. The 25 participants battled fiercely, and in the end, we crowned 4 finalists who will continue to participate in the competition to be held at Syracuse University. 2 of the students represent Wellwood, and the others are from Eagle Hill. Congratulations to all participants, all 25, for making an exciting competition. Item 3, Parent Council. We held our first installment of Parent Council this week. The focus group topic was on facilities. While the participants were limited, I was joined by our Assistant Superintendent for Business Services, Mr. Brad Corbin, to discuss the high school capital improvement project, electric buses, this year's building conditions survey that you heard mentioned earlier, and the fact that any aquatic center deliberations would be in the hands of the Facilities Committee. And item last, the electric bus town hall meeting. Speaking of Mr. Corbin, I'd like to thank him for planning and delivering our recent electric bus town hall meeting. I would also like to express our gratitude to our Director of Transportation, Mr. John Cunningham, who was here earlier this evening, our mechanics and bus drivers who participated and added commentary both in the afternoon and evening town hall sessions. The afternoon town hall session followed the regional mechanics meeting that included mechanics, directors of transportation, school business officials, and a few of my colleagues, superintendents, who came to learn more about the electric buses. I'd also like to express my sincere appreciation to our corporate partners, New York State Bus Sales, National Grid, who provided the fleet assessment, electrical service audit, and Polera, who provided the recent electric vehicle fleet charging and infrastructure study. That ends my first superintendent's report.
Are there any questions for Dr. Tice on his first report? Thank you. Your second report?
For item 2.06, Superintendent's Report, Mental Health, the backup information is in board docs. Item 1, Research and Marketing Strategies Organizational Meeting. Representatives from RMS met with school officials last week. This was our second meeting to finalize the autumn administrations of the faculty staff survey as well as the student survey. Each survey will be similar to the school climate and culture survey that was administered in the spring of 2023. We anticipate the student survey being rolled out here in mid-November and the faculty staff survey probably in December after Thanksgiving. Item 2, student assistance counselor added to the middle school level. I'm pleased to report that another student assistance counselor has been added to the middle school level, split between both middle schools. Like the student assistance counselor at the high school, the middle school student assistance counselor joins us from Contact Community Services. And last but not least, under safety and security, as reported in the media, Onondaga County is partnering with an agency to provide school safety and security training in the Salem-Kaiser Cascade model. Fayetteville-Manlius Central School District, thanks to Amy Evans, has organized a 5-person team and is registered for this important behavioral and threat assessment training, which is expected to take place on December 4th and 5th at the On Center. That concludes my mental health report.
Dr. Tice, related to Dan's comment from your statistical report, was there any discussion with the RMS folks about expanding some of the questions to try to get at access to tutoring services, or, just trying to dive into how they're, feeling like they're either supported in their academic careers here or whatever other categories we wanted to look at to gauge those leading indicators?
We have another meeting set up this week to go over the finals, so I will bring that up at that time. We did change the survey For example, if you remember, Dr. Kilmer had the Cohen perceived stress scale indicators that he used in his dissertation in an effort to streamline the study. We've eliminated those in order to add more questions. So I will double check on that, because part of the method to the madness is being able to triangulate the student survey with the faculty and staff survey, with the family survey later. So I will certainly add that, my 2 cents in this week.
Dr. Tice, am I correct in assuming that this 5-member team who will be trained in Salem, Kaiser, Cascade will then come back and train others?
It's a turnkey training kind of a thing. We didn't want to empty all the buildings, obviously, on any, for 2 of those days. So it is a representative sample, including an administrator, counselor, family school liaison, CIRO. So the idea is that there's enough representation throughout the district that we can come back and train the individual building teams. And with Ms. Evans overseeing it, I think it's important for all our, in terms of working with Heidi Green and Director of Counseling, to be able to replicate that if we see the utility to it. And it was also, just so you know, limited space. Onondaga County invited us, but certainly they're inviting representatives from all different districts. So as much as we may want to have sent a number of representatives, there's only limited space for us. Good question.
Craig, just if you could provide a quick update on where we are with the additional services we contracted with the county for. I know we were working to get those positions hired and filled. Can you just kind of give us a status as to where we're at with that?
I can give it a stab, and then maybe Ms. Evans can augment anything. I know we're still waiting for the Promise Zone specialist from Onondaga County, and she has been diligently working with Arise, who will provide the clinicians. So the space for the clinics has been put in for the 3 schools, the 3 secondary schools that need to be approved, and then we'll be able to go forward with that. So we still have not heard anything, correct, on the Promise Zone?
Thank you so much.
Any additional questions for Dr. Tice? Okay. Dr. Tice?
And then last but not least, I wanted to take an opportunity to read a statement. I would like to apologize for the statement I issued on October 13th in response to the Israel-Hamas war. Some felt the message was poorly worded and offensive. After speaking with members of the community and after much reflection, I understand how my words exasperated feelings of anger and sadness during an already frightening and challenging time. For that, I am sorry. When there is a crisis, whether in our schools or across the world, the district's top priority is to ensure a safe environment for our students. District officials are continuing to dialogue about how and when to respond to current events, both in the United States and overseas, that may directly or indirectly affect our school community. This is especially important when these events may be both emotionally and politically charged. The intention of my original message was to let students, families, and staff members know that counseling support and resources are available. As superintendent of schools, my job is to ensure the well-being, health, and safety of our students. The fabric of this community is diverse, and no matter your religion, race, ethnicity, disability, gender, sexual orientation, or other diverse background, and as a district, we never want anyone to feel alone when navigating a difficult situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tice. Moving to item 2.07, committee and representative updates. So audit met on September 26th. Our next meeting is November 28th. Was there anything you wanted to share, Daryl? Are we good? Okay, thank you. Community relations met August 28th and is meeting next week on the 16th. Is there anything to follow up with? Okay. All right, facilities, there we go. Last meeting was October 19th, and they're also meeting on the 16th. Dan?
Yeah, so some of it we've covered already. So the tech edition that Dr. Tice referenced is, believe it or not, looking at the steel outside, is still planned to be occupied this school year. So a lot of work to be done there, but progressing. We reviewed just the status of the ongoing high school project and where things are at, and all is on schedule with that. We are in facilities having extensive discussions on the two of the topics that we've talked about tonight, which is electric busing and the facilities that we would need to be able to support that, and the infrastructure that we would need to support that, as well as the concept or potential of an aquatic center. And as we've already talked about, those are discussions that are going to continue. I think it's very important to understand, as we referenced earlier, that the building condition study will be available in early 2024, and that's going to go a long way toward guiding what's required in the facilities that we have today. That's not going to address potential new facilities or additional facilities. That addresses the condition of what we have today, but what we have today needs to be maintained and proper and safe and secure and the right facilities for the educational programs that we offer. So there's a lot of continued work to be done in blending that with needs and wants to a long-range facility plan, and we'll continue those discussions and that work in the coming months. And that's all I had on that. Happy to answer any questions.
Since this is my kind of first go-around with the building condition survey, I know we do it every 5 years. How often are we surprised by something that comes out of there? I know we are at least every year, per our own policy, looking at, our buildings and grounds and the status of those. So I'm just curious, the level of detail, is there anything, do we really need to wait for the building condition survey to have a good sense of where our priorities are?
Look, we've been working on long-range planning and building by building work, and regardless of that, Dr. Tice, you can speak to that. The last two of them that I went through, one while I was on the board, one not, there are not a lot of surprises in there. We do a really thorough job of knowing our buildings and knowing our facilities and what needs to be done and having them on the schedules for work to be done. We've already started the discussions about when a next building referendum would be and which buildings are going to be involved in that. So I don't want there to be a perception that things are on hold pending release of that. The work and planning is deeply underway regardless of that. If there are some additional highlights that get targeted out of that. I will say, in asking, are there surprises? Our biggest surprise in the last several years did not come out of the BCS. Our biggest surprise concerned House 1 at the high school, and that had nothing to do with the BCS. So we continue learning and knowing what we need to know about our buildings. That's a state required piece of it. We have to do it, but it is not the end all be all of that we wait with bated breath to decide find out what we don't know and need to do.
Just to add to that, the building condition survey was last done in 2015. That was a time when they were every 5 years. They postponed it now till 2023 because I think they realized they didn't have the staffing to do it at those 2015, 2020, 2025. So the idea was to spread it out and make it manageable. So we were deferred in a sense because of the fact that based on our last survey, which was about 120 million plus or minus worth of work, you can do the finger counting. We've chipped away with the Wellwood project, the energy performance contract now at the high school, but even the simple math will tell you that there's still some items from that 2015 survey that'll probably rear their ugly head on the new survey. The good news is, as Mr. Seidberg alluded to, the BCS prioritizes. So we've really hit those major priorities. If you wax nostalgic, I know you were just on the community committee at the time, but back then we were worried about the boilers, in particular at Wellwood, and the high school boilers were single digits, probably 7 to 9 years newer than the Wellwood boilers. So we were definitely concerned about infrastructure items, so hence the work at Wellwood, the high school, the energy performance contract to try to address some of those as well. So the good news is we've hit all the priorities. The bad news is there's still some other lower priority items which now will be mixed in with the new building condition survey. So it'll just give us another reset to kind of look at what our needs are, thanks to what the prioritizations are.
But just to the point that work continues, so it's not just in referendum planning and long-term, but also the cap transfer projects that are part of the regular budget and done. So just in terms of status on that, for example, on the 22-23 Fayal and Enders Road, so AC at Fayal, which is almost fully functional, was completed. The storefront security addition at Enders Road, these are things that did not wait and are not waiting for a BCS. And on the next set of cap transfer items, it included Mott Road AC and the Mott Road bathroom renovations as next on tap for that. And so work is always continuing and underway on all of our facilities.
And the board can certainly pat themselves on the back too, along with our business office with Mr. Corbin and Mr. Furlong before him, because those cap transfer projects, as you remember from COVID, federal money was earmarked for air quality and air handling. So even though we heard from faculty and parents and students about installing air conditioning in the different buildings, and rightfully so, we were able to use that federal money to help defray some of the costs associated with that. So we are, as Mr. Seidberg indicated, chipping away with the little, the capital transfer projects along with the major projects.
Any additional questions for Dan? Okay, if not, we'll move on to Policy Committee, met on the 24th. We're meeting again next week. Sherry?
So we have been working on aligning the NYSBA, our NYSBA policy, their sample policies of the 1000 series, making sure that they match with what we have and that we've covered all things that we currently have, mostly in our bylaws section, how we run the board operations. And we finally made it through our first time through. And now we're going back and, checking if there are things we have to follow up on. One thing that you'll see is under board development, there's a NYSBA sample policy 2111. This was one they did not send to us, but we found out after the fact that it exists and we could add this. It's board member authority, and it mainly deals with what each board member, what our responsibility is when we speak to the public, when we speak to individuals in the public, which has been a discussion that we've had as a board. So we wanted to bring that to the board so we can discuss whether it's a policy that we think our board should have, or if that's just if the board member authority topic is one that doesn't need to be in policy and it's just an understood. So we can discuss that under ongoing business, but I wanted to bring that to your attention right now. Besides that, our policy committee is continuing to meet every other week because we have so much to do in this policy transition, but we've been very productive, so we'll keep on going. And I will slide right into the legislative liaison report. The first part of the legislative liaison report is the meeting that I attended I was here last meeting, but I was in the building, but I was not sitting at the board table. And in that NYSBA annual meeting where they decide on the NYSBA resolutions and their stances. We had gone through and all of the, as a board, and all of the ones that NISBA recommended that should be voted yes, did pass, with the exception of two. Both of the two that failed were related to testing, that it seems like across the state, people want to keep regents and keep them the traditional way, and that there was a question about, a resolution about regents making it all computerized, and people said we shouldn't have to do that, and so we should advocate that we shouldn't have to do that. And the same thing with limiting the number of regents that are given. Everybody wants to advocate to keep it the way it is. Besides that, everything did pass, but then when we got into the ones that NISBA did not recommend, this is where the meeting became very long, because there are a number of districts downstate who all bond together and they speak for a long time. They each want to speak, and they speak on each other's resolutions, and everybody has to have their amount of time to speak. And so some of those resolutions passed, some failed, and I won't go through them individually, and there didn't seem to be a pattern. However, the meeting, with the 50 resolutions, I shut it down at 11:15 is when I stopped, and I think I missed the last 3 resolutions. So I hope you guys don't mind that I didn't attend through the end. But it started at 4 p.m., and I thought 7 hours and 15 minutes was enough. All right, so the second part of this, during that meeting, we elected Sandra Rufo, who had been our Area 4 director. We elected her as president for NISBA, which means that our Area 4 needs a new director, and there are nominations that are due by November 29th. So if you know anyone, or if you'd like to nominate anyone, or if we as a board want to nominate anyone, just letting you know that that has to be done by November 29th. And that ends both of my reports.
Sherry, would our area director represent us in those NISBA meetings?
Every
is that a-
district does have each district should have their own representative. They need, a quorum is 200 people. So somehow they managed to keep quorum. Like, I thought by 11 p.m. we'd be down below quorum, but somehow they kept quorum. So each district does have to send someone.
Understood, Sarah?
They didn't used to be this long. They used to be like 3 or 4 hour meetings, but it really, Marissa told me that this had happened a decade ago, that a number of districts bond together and start making it get long, and I think it's back. They're doing it again.
When it was in person, people would just leave the room and then that, so they can catch their flights or get home, so that ended it really quick. All righty, thank you very much, Sherry, for those reports. And Angelita's not with us today. So we'll move on to item 3.01, which is, excuse me, public comment.
Marissa, just a
Oops,
quick
I'm sorry.
note. The DEI committee is not on here. I know it's technically an ad hoc committee, but I just want to make sure we do have a space for that committee to report out on the committee work, but really more of the whole community committee. So can we add it and potentially share out for the next meeting?
Sure, and the mental health one as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So we'll add the mental health committee and the DEI committee under committee reports. And who would like to report on the DEI committee work?
I'm happy to. I'm not a chair.
Thank you. And the mental health committee? Thank you very much, Cindy. Okay, add those two and have those two folks reporting. Thank you. All right, then we'll move on to public comment. We have 3 people for public comment. There's 3 minutes per person, and I do want to remind people to refrain from mentioning specific members of the district or students by name or a specific job title where it's identifiable. We may not be able to answer your questions this evening, but we will get back to you as soon as possible. So the first person I have is Mr. Steve Ball.
Next, where you go. All right. Thank you all for taking my comment tonight. I brought my T-shirt. It looks like there's at least one other person here wearing the same shirt, so I'm considering that a success for the day. I started a group on Facebook a few months ago to talk about the need for swimming facilities for the FM school district and the community at large. With the announced closing of Cazenovia College, we really lost a valuable community asset on this side of town that a lot of district residents were using, including myself and my family. So it was not that long ago, I had a very interesting discussion with Brad Ranieri from the CNS School District. We were talked numbers about what they went through, what that impact was for the tax in that district, and I'd like to share them with you. Just a little while ago when you guys were talking, you mentioned that adjusting the old study, you'd come up with around 20 million. The CNS project that they're working on right now is around 18 million. So it's ballpark numbers, should be about right. The tax impact in that community was about $18 a year on 100K property valuation. So for an average family, that's, you know, kind of peanuts compared to the benefits to the community. So if you're doing like a cost benefit analysis, it becomes kind of a no-brainer for how much you can affect and impact the lives of every student who goes through the district and countless people within the community. And I appreciate that the facilities committee is taking a look at this. My ask and the ask of, I guess, the people in the group who are good at sending emails, from what I've heard, is that we make the process more democratic, more open. I would like to engage with the committee and with the town and with the group and have everyone come together and scope this thing out and create a facility that everybody's happy with, that we can pay for and afford and all agree is a good thing for the district. And I think, I appreciate that you're considering this, and I hope that, we can work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next, we have Mr. Chris Isles, is it?
I did not coordinate shirts, but 3 weeks ago, I attended the last board meeting to explain/sell the need for a pool in accordance with the needs of our swim and diving teams. At that meeting, prior to the public comments, the board communicated an email would be sent in response to the request from parents for a pool. I have not seen an email yet. The girls' team just completed another undefeated season, won sectionals for the 8th year in a row, and is sending one swimmer to states. My request at this meeting is that the board sends an email in the next week to at least those that sent in emails or spoke about the need for a pool, as well as to Coach Gallivan, that describes an action plan / next steps with anticipated dates for pursuing a pool. Or at the very least, send an email telling us what date this action plan will be sent. The only way, and I run lots of programs and projects where I work, to drive closure on something like this within a reasonable time frame and gain confidence from the public is to have a robust plan with dates. Additionally, at the last meeting, I heard a request by the board to secure the use of Nottingham Pool for the next several years. I heard from my daughter, there is an agreement with Nottingham. What I'd like to see in this email that is sent about the pool next steps is also to include the necessary details of what has been agreed to for a pool for both the boys and girls teams, what pool or pools that's agreed to with, and for what time periods. Similarly, if that's not available or I was misinformed, tell us a date when that will be provided or next steps. So I simply conclude by repeating what I said the last time, which is the swim and dive teams request and deserve to have equality with the other sports teams that are at the school, and that we do as the t-shirt says, just build it. Thank you.
Thank you. And then next we have Mr. Joshua Weaver. I don't have you on the list. I'd ask our clerk, okay, I'll just have our clerk check to make sure. Thank you. Mhm.
Shall I start over? Josh Weaver here. So I spoke last time. I said the world is not settled. War will happen again. I spoke of the peace and security that we have here. And I'm sure the atrocities of October 7th, the continuing actions, nobody wants to be essentially anywhere else except for here in America. We have at this time nuclear submarines to show strength, aircraft carriers. It's only through our strength that we have our security. I mean, it essentially feels like we're in 1945 where we could be sending out nuclear bombs. It essentially feels like we're in the Crusades, because that's how settled the world is. Only with soldiers and military are we going to get somewhere. And messaging matters, right? I mean, throughout what you guys have said, messaging matters. What people have said about getting religions together, that's one of the reasons why I would suggest honoring the military, is because it's the one place, and we have the same opportunity that I had shortly after 9/11 to feel that sense of unity when I was in the military. And the phrase is, we are all green. And I would even suggest on the morning announcements that you guys remind your students, we're all green. We're all the same. Because before you can talk about anything else, before you can actually get to a discussion, you have to feel as one. Just as you're a basketball team or a football team or a squad in the military, you have to feel as a cohesive unit. One other thing on logistics is not everything for the military exemption is going to happen right away, because I would imagine they have to file it. I don't know if the same thing is true for the elderly exemption as well, whether it's automatic or not, but I would suggest that information is found out, because it's going to be more of a trickle in. And there's also going to be military members who may not want to put in their DD 214 to claim that exemption. So I would also suggest that there is a cap on that as well, so we know for sure to give the people of the community some security to say, this is all we're going to allow, this is all that we have forecasted. If it needs to be adjusted, we will, but there will be a cap on this. I'll leave you with, I want to say this is more than just about money. This is about what veterans in our community do give us. So I sincerely hope the peace and security that we have is appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chaim, did you send an email or did you? I signed up on the form on the district Okay, because they don't have that, but I don't want to like ask the board if we can show some grace. It's not here, but, okay, there we go. Mhm.
Ready, set, go. Dr. Tice, first I want to thank you for your statement. I wish you had issued it 2 weeks ago, but I thank you nonetheless. I appreciate it. And as I said 2 weeks ago, your first email was a draftsman mistake, and I know who you are, and I appreciate that. However, I'm going to ask that you send your statement out to the entire school district, so they know that you owned a draftsman error and not simply just put it on the website, because if you don't look on the website, people aren't going to know that you apologize. So I'm going to ask for that. There are 2 important dates in the Jewish calendar this week. One is today and one's Thursday. The one today marks the end of the 30-day mourning period for the Jews who were slaughtered by Hamas on October 7th. And Thursday, I believe, is the 85th anniversary of Kristallnacht, which my grandparents lived through. College campuses are a train wreck. Columbia, Penn, Brown, you name it. I witnessed it with my son at a college visit 2 weeks ago. The world's upside down. And unfortunately, some of the anti-Semitism continues to exist in FM. 10 days ago, I had to contact a building principal because the family that was affected would not. And I did not disclose the name of the family to the building principal because I was asked not to. And the principal made a good comment. If the parents don't come forward, I can't do anything about it. Dead on. What I'm asking Dr. Tice for you to do is to please instruct and remind all of the building principals to let the kids know that they have a safe space to come forward and disclose any anti-Semitism, any Islamophobia, any kind of racism based on race, whatever the racism is. The kids need to be able to feel safe to come in and speak. I'm going to end on a positive note. My son, who's a senior, and a couple of his Jewish friends started a Jewish Culture Club a couple of months ago. They had their first event last week. They had 40 kids. And from what my son tells me, a lot of them were not Jewish, which I think is amazing. We as adults, not you, but the world as adults, should take the lead from these kids. You are able to have differences of opinion about what's going on in the world, and you should be able to come together and talk about it, which is exactly what these kids did. So, Dr. Tice, again, I thank you, and I urge you to please send out your statement in a mass email to the district so they know that you did own your statement from right after the war started. Thank you.
Next, item 5.01, board development. So as Sherry mentioned earlier, there is a NYSBA Area 4 call for nominations for that position. If anybody wants to get more information about it, Sandy Ruffer, I'm sure I can get you in touch with her to talk to you about what that position entails. Sherry, did you want to speak to the sample 2111 policy?
I think I mentioned it during my report, but it really is a policy that we do not have, and we've already gone through the 2000s, and for some reason, NYSBA did not recommend it at the time. I think they were trying to match up their recommendations with what we already had, but Sarah Gridley was able to find that this exists and knows that we've had these discussions recently about when a board member speaks to as an individual versus who speaks for the board, and do we want to have this as a policy or modify it? So I don't know if anybody has opinions. The policy committee would love to hear.
I mean, it's a pretty straightforward policy. It just codifies what we already know, what we're trained to do when we start as board members. I think it would be a welcome addition. I wouldn't really I didn't look super closely, but I don't even know if I would change the language. But I would support adding it as a policy for FM.
Any other opinions, pro, con?
So, Sherry, I think when we talked about this briefly in policy, we thought maybe there were elements of it that we should include in a different policy. And so there was also the conversation, do we want it as a individual policy or, there was one, I can't remember which.
You're correct, and I forgot about that, some of the lines in here, I think stuff like information from executive sessions must remain confidential are already under, we have a policy about executive sessions and stuff like that.
Right, so we didn't want to
Yeah.
duplicate. The one thing that this policy doesn't talk about, but that we have talked about recently is, which sort of falls under this heading, is, when board members have conversations in a board meeting, when does it constitute a directive versus a conversation? And that's all. So I don't know if that's also something that if we were to adopt something like this, if we would want to consider making some modifications and adding some language to clarify that, because I know that that has come up several times in the last little while, from a board member's perspective, that I can only speak for myself, that I was surprised at. So I don't know if it makes sense to clarify that for all.
That sound good to everybody? We're good?
So during policy, we will discuss, well, Rebecca, you said that that you're good with the wording. If we find anything that overlaps with another policy, are you good with us taking it out because it's already in a different policy? And then Sarah will discuss adding language that talks about board discussions and when something becomes an official statement of the board. All right?
Okay. Last but not least, the National School Board Association has a conference April 6th through the 8th in New Orleans, if anyone is interested in attending that. I think we could take off that complimentary webinar, because that's already passed. Okay, working agenda items, we clean that up. So we can add more things to there.
So, right, are we not, it looks like we're supposed to have a resolution to send you to the conference, or is that not?
Me?
Well, that's what it says up in the,
No, I'm
Or is
not
that-
going to, what? I think that's from, nope, I'm not going.
Oh.
Nope. Nope. I don't know where that came from. Nope. I'm not sure why that's there, but nope, I'm not planning on going. I'll be rocking my grandbaby then, so nope, I won't be there. Nope. So we can disregard that. I'm not sure how that ended up in there.
What number are you?
There's a resolution in there under, for me to go, but I didn't sign up and I have no interest in being in New Orleans at all. Nope. Okay, all right, so moving on to, let's see, working agenda items.
Marissa, can you go back to item 4.01?
4. Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. Approval of the minutes from October 16th regular meeting. Is there a motion that we approve the minutes of the October 16th, 2023 meeting as presented? Is there a motion? Thank you, Cynthia. Second from Daryl. Any discussion? All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining?
I'm abstaining because I was not present in the meeting.
Sorry, you were in another long meeting. Thank you. All right, so we've got working agenda items. Anyone have any discussion for that one? No? Okay. Potential considerations for future meetings? Okay. Future meeting agendas. So if we're changing the tax exemptions hearing from the 27th, that's potentially the 11th now, you said, Dr. Tice?
Yeah, we would move it to December 11th, and then the
Okay.
high school report, given the tragedy and the loss of the student at the high school, they've asked to move their presentation to February 26th.
Thank you. Next, we have Dates to remember. Have they released what the musical is yet? I thought I heard it was gonna be this, well, it's only Monday, but it's not out there yet, no? The clues, I can't with the clues. Something about a man on a roof and a European evening, city at night, I don't know what that would.
It's not Fiddler. They said it's
No,
not Fiddler.
so those are the clues, but I don't know what that would. And I Googled just those clues, but I think he made it so that you can't Google it. What's that one? Moulin Rouge. Oh,
They said it's not Fiddler.
all right, well, we'll just, we're all gonna have to just wait a little bit longer.
Moulin Rouge Junior.
Yeah, I had to think about that one for a minute there. That would be tricky to do. Okay. All right. Oh, community-wide chess tournament, that's new, I think. I've not seen that before. That looks interesting. Under, future meeting, why is it under future meeting agenda? Oh, dates to remember, the chess tournament, the community-wide chess tournament. That looks, I don't think I've ever seen that on there before. Perhaps I missed it, but that's pretty interesting. It's nice to see new events pop up under here, so that's good. All right, next, consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Thank you, Sherry, and a second from Jason. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye, and no one's opposed or abstaining. All right, so then we're gonna go to executive session. What? Whoop. Oh, I was gonna do it right after, but we can do it now, thank you. So we did want to observe a moment of silence because we did lose a beloved student at the high school, Wyatt. So if we can observe a moment of silence for Wyatt. Thank you. Okay. Item 8.01, proposed executive session. Jason, do you want to make a motion? You make a motion that we move to executive session. I believe it was for the purpose of discussing the employment history of a particular person. Thank you, Jason. Is there a second? Second,
If
please.
I could pluralize, make it persons.
Persons.
There's an attachment in your, that
Yes.
I'd like to talk to you about.
Is there a second? Thank you, Cindy. Any discussion? So I just want to just clarify, the reason why I asked you to make the motion is so that we have to have a process when people want to add things to the agenda, so I don't simply put things on there, because then people are like, oh, you're just putting things on the agenda. That way you come to the meeting, you make the motion, and it's fine. Nobody's going to object to it. Well, I don't, most of the time. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye, and no one's opposed or abstaining. All right, so move into executive session, and then we'll adjourn immediately thereafter. Thank you.